Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, October 14th, 2015, halfway through the month, sneaking up on Halloween. Going to be a lot of fun this year. We've had a bunch of new families with little kids move into the neighborhood, and so it's going to be fun seeing them all out with their costumes and everything like that. All righty, quick program note. Our third hour guest today is Doug Eberhard from Buy Gold and Silver Safely, talking about the obvious benefits of putting some of your wealth into physical metal, especially as we see more and more talk about negative interest rates, which basically amount to a tax on your money. And more talk about a cashless society, so you can't pull your money out of the bank when the bank gets into trouble. And apparently the price of gold set a 3-month high last night, 3.5-month high last night. So perfect timing for all of this stuff to be going on. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Turning on over to Syria, the flashpoint for what too many people are trying to turn into World War III. Russia has now conducted 500 airstrikes against ISIS in just 2 weeks. They have just hammered them. Command centers, bunkers, weapons depot, and according to statements being issued by Syria's government, Russia has succeeded in destroying most of ISIS military ammunition, doing in just a little over 2 weeks what the U.S. claimed they were doing but failed to do over the last entire year. The U.S. is now adjusting their aid program to supply a new rebel group in Syria. They've taken the old rebel group, they've given them all new name tags and new ID cards and said, see, these are new good guy, moderate rebels trying to overthrow the government, and we're going to be starting to give them weapons and stuff, and it's all going to wind up back in the hands of ISIS and Al-Qaeda because it's all the same people, hired mercenaries. And the U.S. is out there trying to say, well, you know, there are bad terrorists and there are not so bad terrorists, and we're going to help the not so bad terrorists, which still makes the U.S. government a state sponsor of terror, which I was always told that's a bad thing here. The Syrian diplomat is out there saying that ISIS is on the verge of destruction. They have just been hammered by the Russians. And at this point, it doesn't appear to me like ISIS is able to function as a cohesive group. It's basically little pockets of resistance that are scrambling around trying to figure out how am I going to get out of this country with my skin still on my body. The people of Syria are very much in favor of Russia's intervention because apparently America's moderate rebels have been bombing civilians, which, according to the U.S., that's just collateral damage. You know, if we're going to accomplish the aim of replacing the government of Syria, to make omelets, you got to break eggs. Anyway, the United States is still refusing any contact with Russia to coordinate anti-terrorist actions in Syria, and there's a very good reason for that. If the U.S. shares what they're doing, what they're bombing, and who they're attacking with Russia, Russia immediately knows that the U.S. has not really been after ISIS and Al-Qaeda for the last year. They have been bombing Syrian factories, pipelines, refineries, grain silos, the food supply. That's a war crime, by the way. And so they're having to stand there and say, nope, we're not going to coordinate with you. And let's see, apparently over on Fox News they had U.S. officials saying Russia is deliberately targeting the U.S.-backed forces in Syria. Yeah, those U.S.-backed forces launched an attack on Moscow's embassy just a couple of days ago. I mean, if it were you, wouldn't you shoot back? And when Russia came in to Syria at the invitation of the Syrian government, Russia came in to say, we will remove the terrorists trying to destroy your country. And it didn't delineate between the good terrorists and the bad terrorists. And it never claimed to. The U.S. is trying to sell this idea that there are good terrorists and bad terrorists, and we have to support the good terrorists in the middle of the so-called war on terror. As we find out, our government has been arming ISIS and Al-Qaeda all along to create this phony enemy to justify U.S. intervention in the country. And by the way, if you heard on the news break, they're getting ready to do it again down in Cameroon. Oh, we have to go after Boko Haram, which has every appearance of being yet another U.S.-created phony bad guy to justify invading and taking over somebody else's country. Now, the U.S. Army commander in Europe has made a very accurate and honest statement, may cost him his career, saying that if, in point of fact, the U.S. government is after ISIS in Syria, the United States needs Russia to be on board. This is General Hodges. And again, Putin has played this beautifully. He has caught the U.S. government in its own propaganda. We're seeing another story coming out of Veterans News now. The U.S. must call off the dogs of war in Syria. And they're pointing out that we're seeing all this death and destruction and, oh, it's all the fault of the bad guys. No, it isn't. We're talking about a 4-year long, going on 5, covert criminal war by the United States against the Syrian government. There's been no formal declaration of war by Congress. There's no UN resolution. U.S. intervention into any country under those circumstances is a violation of international law. It's a violation of the UN Charter. The U.S. government are the bad guys here. The U.S. government are the aggressors. Just tally up how many nations the U.S. government has attacked, drone-struck, tried to overthrow in the last 12 years. Now, over in Great Britain, the Labour Party there is hinting at backing a Syrian intervention, even if the United Nations doesn't agree to it. So Britain, to please their masters in Washington, D.C., are willing to go rogue, violate international law, violate the UN Charter, because the U.S. says we have to get Assad because we've got to weaken Syria so it's not a threat to Israel, and we've got to smash Syria so it opens a corridor toward war with Iran. Meanwhile, Pepe Escobar is out there with an article, Say Hello to My Cruise Missiles, a little bit tongue-in-cheek there, basically saying that Russia deliberately used the fleet in the Caspian Sea to launch their cruise missile attack against ISIS in Syria to basically show just how capable the Russian cruise missiles are. 1,500 kilometers away, hit their targets. That's why the U.S. came out with this story from the usual anonymous sources, you know, that, oh, a bunch of those things fell out of the sky on Iran. Really, they're not that good. They're not that effective. We don't need to be concerned. You don't want to buy Russian cruise missiles. Ours are really much better. And they came out with that. And, of course, both Russia and Iran are saying, no, that did not happen. And I loved the Russian response to that. Because Russia's response was that every target they aimed at got hit. And if the U.S. story about some of these cruise missiles falling into Iran to be true, meant some of those targets in Syria had to spontaneously combust. The Russians do have a great sense of humor. There's no question about that whatsoever. Talking about playing jokes on people, I couldn't believe this story when it came up on Fox News. They're now trying to claim that Cuban troops are joining the Russian offensive in Syria. The Cubans are in there. And bull biscuits. This is someone trying to build a case for a new invasion of Cuba. And the reason we know that is the source for this claim that Cuban troops are in Syria is not Syria. It's in Miami, the Institute for Cuban and Cuban American Studies on the campus of the University of Miami. But if you go over to the CIA's own recruiting website, it admits the University of Miami is one of the largest CIA domestic stations, going all the way back to the Kennedy years. And the CIA at the University of Miami, their target is Cuba. Always has been. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And as you're probably already aware, the U.S. government spent $500 million, with a B, of your tax dollars to train the moderate rebels who are now rebranded as the Syrian Democratic Forces, who are going to force democracy on Syria whether they want it or not. And it was deemed a complete failure because most of the people simply switched sides, took their U.S. supplied weapons, went over to ISIS and Al-Qaeda, the unit that stayed behind the first time they went into combat, they were absolutely humiliated. It was a disaster. So, of course, Obama is getting ready to blow another $600 million on a new program to train these other Syrian moderates over here who will get Bashar al-Assad for us. And it's not going to work again. Obama's getting bad advice, is the bottom line. He's getting bad advice, or the strain has gotten to him. Now, an international panel of experts is getting ready to investigate the U.S. bombing of the Doctors Without Borders hospital in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, because of the rules, they're required to get the permission from Afghanistan and from the U.S. I'm sure Afghanistan will agree to it. The U.S. absolutely will not. They're already out there with a checkbook loaded with your tax dollars, handing out consolation money, meaning hush money, to get everybody to shut the heck up. Over at foreignpolicy.com, they have an article inside the Doctors Without Borders hospital in Kunduz. It is a photo essay of the remains of that hospital. And anybody who says this was an accident, you look at those pictures. The U.S. absolutely demolished the place. Remember, it wasn't a bombing. It was an attack from an airborne asset, an AC-130 Spectre aerial gunship. This thing carries a 105mm howitzer, Vulcan miniguns, 40mm Bofors, automatic gun, bunch of other stuff. They shredded the place. Doesn't look like an accident to me. It's not going to look like an accident to anybody. It appears the goal of the U.S. government was to get Doctors Without Border and any other independent observers out of Afghanistan so they can't report on what's really going on, like those long lines of military trucks loaded with opium heading for the border. Now, Erdogan has come on out and declared that the blasts that happened in Turkey, the twin blasts at Ankara, have their roots in Syria. We're sure this came from Syria, and this gives us a right to invade. So, yes, as a lot of people speculated, this was another false flag to start another war. It is backfiring, though. Major protests, riots even, in Turkey. The people of Turkey are sick and tired of Erdogan constantly licking the butt of the U.S. government in terms of the war agenda. And this false flag may actually trigger a civil war in Turkey itself. Now, there's a very interesting article over at Investment Watch blog. The U.S. government objective is to provoke nations around the world to start the next war. The U.S. wants to act like the good guy. And that's the reason there have been so many of these frauds. The U.S. wants to have the high moral ground, so we'll poke at Japan for a whole year to get them to attack Pearl Harbor and then act like it's a big surprise. We'll sail the Lusitania loaded with weapons into the Irish Sea where we know there are German U-boats with no escorts for the Lusitania, wait for the Germans to sink it and then scream, oh, innocent lives, there were no weapons on the Lusitania. Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, torpedoes on the Gulf of Tonkin. How many times do you have to be lied to before you understand and accept down to the very bottom of your soul that this is how the government and the corporate media operate? They are going to say whatever they think will get you to do what they want. Truth, reality, facts absolutely do not mind. Anyway, very alarming development. The United States Air Force has struck a contract with Boeing for new tail kits for the B-61 nuclear gravity bombs. These are city busters, nuclear weapons. Now, what the tail kit consists of, besides the tail cone itself, control fins and navigation and targeting electronics. They are upgrading these nuclear weapons to hit their targets a little bit more accurately. Not that it really matters if it misses you by 100 yards or so, but they're tuning up the nuclear bombs. I keep telling you, when the U.S. gets into this mess with Russia and China, on the day when they finally accept they cannot win the war conventionally, they're going to resort to the nuclear arsenal. This supports that. Now, to nobody's surprise, Russia strongly disagrees with the Dutch probe into Malaysian Airlines 17. They have a lot of company on that. I'm not buying it either. And they are continuing with their own investigation. So is the manufacturer of the Buk missile. And Russia has gone to the International Civil Aviation Organization at the United Nations to say they should investigate this. And unlike the Dutch investigation, they should look at all the evidence, including the technical data from the manufacturer of the Buk missile system and radar data provided by Russia. I actually got an email from somebody who said, you know the Russians are going to lie. You can't listen to them at all. You've got to listen to the U.S. government. I said, well, Russia's not the one who fed us that line about Saddam's nuclear weapons. Of course they're going to get the benefit of the doubt. And I'm not saying the Russians aren't lying, because everybody lies during wartime. But let's not give the U.S. government the presumption of truth here after all that we have been lied to. Now, Iran, which has rattled everybody's nerves with the first successful test of their long-range ballistic missile, and already Israel and the United States are saying, this violates some treaty, this violates a law, we can't have them actually able to defend themselves. And upping the ante, Iran has actually revealed photos of one of their underground missile bases. They are buried 500 meters deep. Nothing less than a nuclear strike is going to take them out. The existing conventional bunker busters will not reach them. And apparently they have managed to construct quite a few of these. And what Iran wants to do is to deter aggression. Remember, Iran as a nation has not launched an invasion into another country in a war of conquest in over 200 years. Israel certainly can't say that. The United States can't say that. Iran is not the problem here. They're trying to basically give Israel and the U.S. a reason to mind their own business. And that's it. Now, Kerry has announced he's on his way to Israel to try and defuse the tensions between Israel and Palestine. No doubt he's got a big checkbook filled with your tax dollars to bribe Israel with. Good luck on that one. I don't think it's going to happen. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about John Kerry is on his way over to Israel to try and calm that situation down. Now, obviously, following Netanyahu's defeat here in the U.S. Congress over the P5+1, their embarrassment, trying to sneak into Syria with their F-16s being turned back by the Russians. The idea that Syria might not be broken into pieces and Israel get the goal on with all those oil reserves. Netanyahu is doing what he always does. He's throwing a tantrum. He's kicking the dog, and the dog happens to be the Palestinians. And over the last several days, we've seen all of these provocations, settlers going on in, burning olive trees, setting fires to homes, shooting homes with bullets, all protected by the IDF. There are videos of the IDF dressing up as Palestinians and throwing rocks in order to justify, if you will, reprisals. And as usual, the body count is very lopsided. Some 1,300 Palestinians have now been shot by the Israelis. Netanyahu is waiting for the Palestinians to do something he can point to and say, see, they're starting it. They're starting it. So Kerry's on his way over there to try and head off a new intifada. And it's not that anybody in the government of the United States, in Washington, D.C., cares about the Palestinians because, for the most part, they don't. The problem here is the petrodollar deal. Because when Richard Nixon ended gold convertibility of the U.S. Federal Reserve note, international demand for the dollar plummeted. Countries didn't feel they needed to come and borrow those dollars at interest from the Federal Reserve or give us very favorable trade arrangements of bringing manufactured goods and produce to the U.S. in exchange for those pieces of ink and paper, because the ink and paper was no longer redeemable for gold. So the U.S. government went out and they struck the petrodollar deal. They went to all the oil nations of the Middle East, and they said, here is the deal. If you will sell your oil only for the U.S. dollar and invest those dollars back in the U.S., we will guarantee your military safety. The implication being from Israel, whom the U.S. was actually arming at the time. Well, ever since 9/11, Israel has basically gone its own way. It's attacking and bombing and killing in Lebanon and West Bank and Gaza and Syria. And every time they do that, the oil nations in the Middle East are reminded that the United States can no longer keep up their end of the petrodollar deal. And so these Middle Eastern nations are starting to say, well, you know, the petrodollar deal is dead. I can sell my oil for whatever currency a buyer wants to use here. And if I accept rubles and yuan, I can send them back to their countries and actually get something of value for it, manufactured goods and produce. The U.S. doesn't have that anymore. Our manufacturing is in decline. Our products, like our weapons, are bloated, expensive, and not very good, and nobody wants our agriculture. So the U.S. is in this very awkward place of trying to keep the petrodollar deal in place, either through threat of military intervention, as it's already done with Iraq and Libya, or just trying to maintain the illusion that somehow the United States is still able to influence Israel and get them to kind of behave. And I don't think Kerry is going to meet with a huge success here, because Netanyahu bet his reputation that he was going to get the U.S. Congress to defy Barack Obama and kill the P5+1 deal, and he didn't get it. And now he's looking weak to his own country. And this is his way of reasserting his sense of power and authority, is going on out with the final solution to the Palestinian question. And by doing so, he will trigger a wider regional war, which means Israel gets to start dreaming again about the Litani River up in Lebanon and grabbing off the Golan Heights with those rich oil resources, while American kids go get to catch all the bullets flying back and forth. Now, here in the United States of America, the good thing is that the display before the Congress by Netanyahu and AIPAC was too visible. Everybody saw what was going on, and now their antennas are out. This idea that, you know, screaming that anybody who says Israel has too much influence in the U.S., oh, you're an anti-Semitic Jew-hater who wants Hitler to come back and gas the Jewish babies in the ovens. And they're beginning to realize, no, there's something to that. And now, with their eyes opened, they're seeing it. They're seeing how real it really is. And there's an article over at timewarp.org, how the New York Times spins for Israel. And it's basically talking about the New York Times coverage that, you know, Palestinians are dying, but it's the Israelis who are afraid. Israel's a nuclear-armed state. They have the latest and greatest weapons paid for by you, the taxpayer. Somebody was out there asking the Palestinians, why are you throwing rocks? And the Palestinians answered quite accurately, rocks are all we have. And so this article is taking to task one of the New York Times writers, Kirshner, you know, about how, oh, the Israelis they're afraid there's an existential threat coming from Palestine. And it's absurd on the face of it. And now everybody looks at it and they see it's absurd. And the New York Times circulation numbers aren't what they used to be either. Now, there's another article over at abutaminblogspot.com simply titled, Don't See. And it is reporting on how Israel has gone to Facebook and YouTube to block any videos that may be inciting the Palestinians, meaning any videos showing the IDF and the settlers just killing Palestinians with impunity. Like that Palestinian lady at the bus station who was surrounded by the IDF. She puts her hands up to surrender and they gun her down. Oh, that's inciting the Palestinians. Really, they don't need to see that. That's really what's going on over there. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. And aloha, I don't know who you are, where you're calling from, but please identify yourself and tell us what you want to talk about. Are you there? Are you there? Okay, apparently we're having problems with our phone system, and whoever was supposed to be there wasn't. So, anyway, now, article coming out of Desert Peace. And that's a very good website, by the way. We link to a lot of the stuff over there, but you should make a point of visiting it. And it's got an article, Israel sets the trap for Palestine again. And it's saying basically the same thing I am, because Israel has played this game before so many times. Poke, 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 until they get a reaction, then declare the reaction is the initiating provocative event. Oh, the fact that we've been shooting and murdering Palestinians all last week has got nothing to do with it. Those gosh darn Palestinians went and did this. And Israel plays that game over and over and over again. They did it back in 2008, classic example. On November 4th, while we were all watching Obama win his first term in the White House, Israel broke a 6-month ceasefire with Hamas and went in and bombed Gaza, killing 6 Hamas officials. Then Hamas came out and said, I guess the ceasefire is over. And then Israel screamed, Hamas says the ceasefire is over. And they launched a major war. This is how they play this game. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Peter in California, aloha, welcome to the show. I may have to keep you through the commercial break. What's on your mind?
That's fine, Michael, because this will take about 2 minutes for me to talk through the whole thing. But I just called my senator this morning, which I do just about as often as I call into the show, and complained about giving financial, military, and diplomatic aid to the Israelis, and how we share no values with them. At least I hope we don't. The fewer the better. But I wanted to make a point. It was on Mondo Weiss earlier this week.
Okay, hold that thought. Mondo Weiss earlier this week. We got to take a 4-minute break for commercials. Then we'll come back, and you can take your time explaining the rest of this. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and that is still one of my all-time favorite of Claire's original music compositions. We're going to go back here to Peter in California, and you were talking about something you saw in Mondo Weiss.
Yes. It was on both in Mondo Weiss and on Scott Horton Anti-War Radio, which you can get at Anti-War. But they had on a Mondo Weiss, one of their editors named Allison Degger, D-E-G-E-R, who covers nothing but the West Bank and Gaza for Mondo Weiss. And they were talking about how the Israeli police force and occupation forces have relaxed their rules of engagement so that now, without being in imminent danger at all, or no bodily danger whatsoever, the police forces, the Israeli police forces and occupational troops who are now carrying around 22 pistols and rifles can now shoot at any Palestinian they want, even if they're non-threatening. Even if they're non-threatening.
Yeah, and have you noticed how all of the U.S. police who are being trained by these Israeli security companies are starting to treat us the same way?
Michael, I'm your age, exactly. I know it's unfortunate, but I am. And I can remember when I was a kid taking 22s and going down to the dump to blanket rats, right, in Ohio. I was a kid in Ohio. That literally is what the Israeli occupation forces do with the Palestinians. And as I called my congressman this morning to talk about this, at least their mouthpiece on the phone, I made the point that we should cut off financial, diplomatic, and military aid. I discussed this that I'm talking about you with. And I said, do we share any values with these people? No, we don't. At least we shouldn't be. And the other thing is, but we spend billions of dollars supplying people when we said, well, there was a threat to Gaddafi was horrible to his people. Of course, it was a lie. And we gave them billions of dollars to all these Al-Qaeda and ISIS people, these terrorists, to overthrow them. We did the same thing. We said that Assad was terrible to his people, and we gave them billions of dollars and all those terrorists. And I said, if we're going to give it to these head-cutting off jerks, which we are, why not drop it where it really counts? Why don't we drop weapons to the Palestinians who really are being genocided big time and really do have a beef?
Well,
and really are oppressed like crazy.
It's not going to happen because the Washington, D.C. is a Vichy government. It is a puppet ruler placed over the United States of America for the benefit of Tel Aviv. And it's time Americans woke up and realized that. And the good news is they're beginning to. And they're no more happy about living under puppet rule than the Iraqis, the Iranians, the Chileans, the Yemenites, the Libyans. Everybody now sees what's going on. All of the lies just don't work anymore.
Well, if I could refer everybody to this Mondo Weiss Allison Degger thing that was on Scott Horton's Anti-War Radio, so they can be armed with this when they talk with these enabling is Jewish American liberals who are saying, like Bernie Sanders, who, chases people who pro-Palestinian advocates, who actually froths at the mouth and chases them off stage at town hall meetings, so they can be armed with the fact that just how brutal. I don't even think the Nazis did that with 22s and, absolutely shooting people with no problem at all, who are not threatening them at all. And just like rats at the dump.
Yeah, it is. It is. But, if you place the shot correctly, you can kill people with a 22. If you go for a headshot to the side of the head, yes.
So, Ahmad's been doing it for years on the CIA. But anyways, that's my point, Michael, and there we go. That's it.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. During the commercial break, somebody wrote in and said, you don't need to look at the New York Times for just how much in control of American media Israel is. Apparently, Howard Stern is in a major public battle with Roger Waters. And I think, again, this is a good thing, because if Howard Stern wants to take it public, that's just fine, because he continues to repeat the claim there was nobody in Palestine before the Jews arrived there. And that is an absolute lie. Howard Stern apparently has seen the evidence for Palestine being there, and he calls it BS. But again, I linked to my article, Israel and Palestine, the maps tell the true story, and if you put that out there, toward the whole lower two-thirds are all scans of maps going back to the Middle Ages showing Palestine is there, and I finally found it and dug it out. This is a 50 mil Palestinian coin from 1935, and according to Howard Stern, this doesn't exist because there wasn't a Palestine to mint it. And if Howard Stern wants to go public on this, we need to chase him and his fans around with the facts and say, Howard Stern is lying. There were people in Palestine. The Lumiere brothers made a silent movie down there. There's all kinds of photographic proof, the maps, all of it. This whole idea that there was no such thing as a Palestine was created by Golda Meir. And all of Israel's supporters around the world just keep going on. There was never a Palestine. There was never a Palestine. There was never a Palestine. And I remember that horrible story about how Palestinians, the culture, is known for fine embroidery. And somebody had put together a traveling exhibit of Palestinian embroidery, and Israel was screaming, there's no such thing as Palestine, you can't have this traveling exhibit. And sure enough, the crates for the exhibit vanished out of the secured storage area at the Los Angeles International Airport and were never seen again. Israel has nuclear weapons. The Palestinians have rocks. And the New York Times says, Israel's afraid. We've got to support Israel. They're afraid. They're so afraid. Well, if they're afraid with nuclear weapons, there's not a whole heck of a lot we can do to give them any courage, is there? They're habitually fearful. But again, there it is. And there's a scan of this in that page. Israel and Palestine, the maps tell the true story. Palestinian coin from 1935. Made out of silver. It's real money, not like that crap we're getting from the Federal Reserve. All righty, let's grab a phone call before the top of the hour news. Damien in New York, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, how you doing?
Doing fine.
I agree with all that you were talking about with regard to Israel, and I just want to kind of clear the air. Excuse me, I'm sorry. On something of your last caller talking about Bernie Sanders and frothing at the mouth with so forth and so on. That's just ridiculous. First of all, he supports this two-state solution. He doesn't want protesters bothering him anymore. Go figure. If Donald Trump had those guys coming in, do you think he'd accept them to come on stage and break up his party? You think so? No, he wouldn't. So, I mean, this whole thing that this person was calling in talking about Bernie Sanders frothing at the mouth, I mean, it sounds very dramatic and everything, but it's just not accurate. You want to talk about his record and what he said in regard to Israel. He's called their actions reprehensible. He's called them out about Palestine. He's pushing a two-state solution. He's said he wants to put an end to settlements in Palestinian territory occupied by Israel. He boycotted Bibi's speech. He stated, he's done all these things in support of Palestine. and he's not an Israel supporter. Whereas you have Donald Trump, he said Obama's not a friend of Israel. He asked his Jewish friends not to support Obama. He said, we will protect Israel totally. He said he's a big fan and supporter of Israel. He made a public endorsement of Bibi, called him a great prime minister. Nobody like him, a terrific leader. What else did he say?
Okay, well, listen, we're running out of time, but I want to respond to that. I think the real issue here is not Sanders versus Trump, but Sanders versus Clinton, because Clinton is fully on board with Israel's agenda. Like every other American politician, she has a picture of herself touching the Wailing Wall, which we know is staged because normally women are not allowed into that part of the old Roman garrison. So, that was all staged and they had to get permission to do that. I've touched the wall. Can I be president now? And Sanders is coming on strong. A lot of people think he won the debate last night. And if Biden doesn't step in, I certainly would rather see Sanders as the Democratic nominee than Hillary Clinton. Hillary cannot be allowed anywhere near the White House.
Yeah, I'm there with you. All
right, well, listen,
I just had an issue with that caller. The dramatics are really great, but
Damien, I gotta cut you. Damien, I gotta cut you off. We gotta take a break for our top of the hour news and commercials. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. We're talking about what's going on in Israel and Palestine. Totally innocent people are being killed, and as that caller mentioned, Netanyahu has basically eased the rules for the behavior of the Israeli police and the IDF. They are allowed to shoot Palestinians for whatever reason they can come up with. When they gunned down that Palestinian woman who was a mother and studying to be a geneticist, the police said, she pulled a knife and she tried to stab us. And then, of course, the videos that people had taken on their cell phones went viral showing that no, there was no knife, there was no attack. They surrounded her. She put her hands up. They shot her down in cold blood. Another story coming out of Man News. Israeli settlers attacked Palestinian homes in the Jabal Jalis area east of Hebron. Just basically opened fire on the buildings. Absolutely. All righty. I got an email during the break from somebody who was responding to my comments about this claim that Cuban troops are now in Syria aiding Russia against U.S.-backed assets as being the beginning of an attempt to gin up support for a new invasion of Cuba, because nobody carries a grudge like the Central Intelligence Agency. And somebody wrote in to say that this last week he saw 2 stories about the John F. Kennedy assassination, putting the blame for the assassination solely on Cuba. And we know that was part of the agenda for killing Kennedy. Did you ever wonder why they planted that Mannlicher Carcano on Lee Harvey Oswald, the world's worst shoulder weapon? Well, that's because that was the rifle that Castro was importing by the shipload to give to the Cuban people to arm them against a potential second Cuban invasion. This was after the Bay of Pigs. And Castro probably got wind of the CIA's Operation Mongoose, which was another attempt at a new invasion, which John F. Kennedy had to shut down. Now, it was a big part of it. Now, Lyndon Johnson changed the story from Cuba to Cray's lone gunman because Johnson had been privy to the negotiations over the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the Soviet Union agreed to pull their missiles out of Cuba, but said there was a condition. If you invade Cuba again, it will immediately mean war up to and including the use of nuclear weapons. So Johnson had to derail the attempt to frame Cuba to head off a potential nuclear war. And that's when the official story about the crazed lone nut assassin in the book depository was crafted together with all the other lies that surrounded it. We'll be talking a lot about that as we get closer to the anniversary of Kennedy's assassination. Now, turning to the economic news, UBS is seeing sovereign assets shrinking by $1.2 trillion with a T dollars. That's 7%. And basically, this is continued fallout from that aborted oil price war that was launched by the United States and Saudi Arabia against Russia. And because in typical Washington, D.C. fashion, it wasn't thought all the way through, we're continuing to see a backlash of damage spreading around the world. All right. China's middle class is now larger than that of the United States. The U.S. used to take pride in the fact that America's middle class was the world's largest. It isn't anymore. We know the American middle class is shrinking. It's being plundered and looted because the poor don't have anything and the rich make too many campaign donations. So everything always comes out of the middle class. And every tyranny in history works to destroy the middle class of a nation because it is from the middle class that opposition to oligarchy rises. Happened in France. The Soviet Union created a system that designed the middle class out of existence right from the very beginning. And so because of that, China's now got the world's largest middle class. America is not the greatest nation on earth any longer by any measurement left. Polls are showing that Main Street America is of the opinion the United States is not headed in the right direction. They're on a wrong track. Yeah, they're trying to solve the economic mess with another world war because, hey, that's what worked back in World War I and World War II. Got us out of the mess, or at the very least we had something to blame for it, something to distract from it. U.S. retail sales tumbled the most since January, indicating sustained recession. We are not in an economic recovery. Walmart is warning their stockholders profits could fall as much as 12% in the next fiscal year. They're dumping the blame for that on being forced to raise wages for their workers. I think it's an easy enough scapegoat to say, oh, we got to pay our workers a minimum wage. What kind of nonsense is that? But the reality is the consumer economy is in collapse because all of our wealth has been sucked out of our pockets into the pockets of the 1%, into the pockets of Israel, into the pockets of the military-industrial complex. And by the way, little footnote. When Eisenhower wrote his farewell address, he originally was going to term it the military-industrial congressional complex. And at the last minute, he took Congress out of there, figuring it would be a bit much to take on all three at the same time. Even though he himself was resigning, he feared a backlash against his party. Now, Federal Reserve officials are calling for negative interest rates to prop up the economy. It's not propping up the economy. It's basically an excuse for them to take more of your money for themselves, to try and fend off that 11th marble. Still out there trying to say, oh, wouldn't everything be wonderful if cash was outlawed? Not really. What would politicians stick into the G-strings of the strippers if you outlaw cash? I mean, this doesn't make any sense. On a more serious note, the idea of banning cash is to prevent people from going to the bank and getting their money out when it looks like the bank has gone into serious trouble. You don't have the ability to pull your money out anymore. You just have to write it down to destruction. And a lot of people are saying, well, the way you deal with that is you take your money out of the bank, you buy gold and silver. And so I am making a prediction that when they finally declare cash to be banned and illegal, they will also put a ban on private ownership of precious metals, just like Roosevelt did in 1933, and for the exact same reason, to save those poor old bankers from the consequences of their own greed and bad behavior. Now, gold hit a 3.5-month high overnight. They're having trouble keeping those prices down. Gold is looking more and more attractive to people. Of course, it should always look attractive. The real metal, not the paper contracts. Those are leveraged to an insane degree right now. Earlier today, I just happened to go out and check on the video version of All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, and it is closing in on 750,000 views over on YouTube. And the comments, for the most part, are very, very positive. Somebody actually called it the most important video on the Internet today. And then, of course, there were the other comments, you're a kook, you're a nut, you're wearing tinfoil, blah, 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 blah. But the word is getting out. People are understanding the real forces that drive the planet into war after war after war after war. And it's all because of that mechanism of private central banking that creates more debt than money with which to pay the debt until the debt drives governments to invasion and conquest to try and keep the bottom of that ledger black. Somebody had a very good article over at warsofcrime.org, What Became of the Vikings? And they're taking issue with people who draw parallels between the current United States government and the collapse of the ancient Roman Empire, saying that Rome, at least when they conquered another country, they built it up The Vikings didn't. They would go in, loot the place, build armed forts, take everything they could, and then leave, and that is actually much closer to how the U.S. treats all the countries it goes into and conquers, whether it's Iraq or Syria or Lebanon. And again, if you look at the before and after photographs of Iraq before the U.S. intervention, it was a beautiful place to live, and today it's rubble all over the place. So yeah, the current U.S. government is much closer to the Vikings than to the Romans, although we do have some insane emperors floating around Sodom on the Potomac. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and the phone lines are really loading up. I'm going to grab some phone calls in a bit, but I want to get through some stories here. Finishing up with the economy, did you know that government workers make 78% more than the identical job in the private sector? That's why people who work for the government are so loyal. They get paid extra money for the same job that, you're being paid less for. The government pays them for their loyalty. Remember that story about this guy that was like spending all of his time looking at porn, and they said, we can't fire him. It's just too difficult to fire a government worker. It's a sweet deal for anybody who gets inside the system. Now then, I want to talk briefly about last night's debate, and I'm going to ask my callers to please bear with me and be patient, but we really want to get onto this thing. CNN is claiming that the public thinks Hillary won last night's Democratic debate. But CNN's own poll on their Facebook page said Sanders won. And they're not the only one. Drudge had a poll, Sanders won. We had a poll, Sanders won by a huge, huge margin. Hillary was up there stammering and clearly out of her depth. And it turns out CNN is not unbiased in this issue. I mean, the CNN debate last night was a coronation for Queen Hillary the First. And as it turns out, the host of the debate, Anderson Cooper, is listed on the Clinton Global Initiative's website, along with CNN's Christiana Manpour, Fox's Greta Van Susteren, NBC's Matt Lauer, Tom Brokaw, the New York Times' Thomas Friedman, Nicholas Kristof, Fox Business Network's Maria Bartiromo, and a bunch of others, Katie Couric. These are all people who are part of the Clinton clique. Anderson Cooper has in the past helped Hillary Clinton raise money. He's one of her fundraisers. And he was presented as the impartial moderator for the debate. Now, we knew that he was going to throw this thing to Hillary because he announced ahead of time, this is going to be about policy. We're not going to get into other things. And yeah, they pretty much glossed over the whole email security scandal situation. Even Michael Moore is out there saying, there's no question, Sanders won the debate. Now, Hillary Clinton was put on the defensive over her flip-flopping on her positions on things. Basically, her only answer was, that she's always maintained true to her values and principles. Because after all, greed and corruption are values and principles, so, of course. And the reality is Hillary has flipped. She's changing her position to whatever she thinks is going to get her the most votes. In 2008, she was against gay marriage, supported the Second Amendment, stood behind her Iraq War vote, and opposed issuing driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. Last night, she was a supporter of same-sex marriage, a supporter of tighter federal gun control measures, admitted her vote for the Iraq War was a mistake, and is an advocate for illegal immigration. So she's totally turned around. We made up a little graphic of Hillary the flipping fish back and forth to illustrate that situation. A lot of people are pointing out Hillary Clinton expressed alarm for the Israeli Jews, just went on and on about them, not one word about the Palestinian victims. She's another bought and paid for Israel whore, and we don't need any more of those in our government. And according to the latest Fox News poll, Hillary is trailing well behind every single top-tier Republican candidate in head-to-head hypothetical matchups. She's trailing Ben Carson by 11 points, Donald Trump by 5, behind Jeb Bush 4 points, and Carly Fiorina. She can't even keep up with Carly, I almost destroyed Hewlett-Packard Fiorina. All right, let's grab some phone calls here. Marty in Idaho, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I have two questions. The first one, I don't know if you'll remember, you mentioned the mammogram, and I was listening to you, but I didn't catch who said that. Is the source, the source of the danger of mammograms or not?
Well, you can go to my you can go to my website, and up in the upper right-hand corner, there's a little search box, and you just type mammogram in there, and it'll give you all the stories at my website. Or you can go to Google and just type in danger of mammograms, and you'll get a whole page full of stuff, okay?
And I know it all, but okay. So number 2, are you familiar with the American Enterprise Institute?
Yes, I've heard of it.
That's about it?
Okay. All right, well, thank you.
I mean, you don't know, yes or no?
I'm sorry?
You don't have an opinion or knowledge about it, right?
I don't have enough opinion. I don't have enough knowledge of it to form an opinion. I've heard of it. I understand they're one of these many organizations that are in there trying to shape government policy for a particular agenda, but I've been paying much closer attention to Project for the New American Century and the Council on Foreign Relations. Anyway, Marty,
okay. All right, thanks.
All right, we're going to let you go, and we're going to go ahead and grab Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I heard this morning in a new snippet.
Yes?
Sorry.
Okay.
That Miss Slick Willie made a statement about Libya, calling Gaddafi a brutal dictator, and that's why she had to do what she had to do. Nobody seemed to call him on it. I thought Sanders should have called her on that right there.
Yeah, because Hillary is basically sounding like she's the one who sent in the operation to get Gaddafi, and that's not her job as Secretary of State. That's basically for Congress to declare war and Obama to sign that. So, yeah, that's an awkward slip.
Well, she pushed Obama on that real bad. I remember that.
Yeah.
I got no use for Obama either. I mean, neither of them had any right to do that. There was time I actually agreed with Louis Farrakhan, who really jumped on them for what they did to Gaddafi. And Gaddafi had the kind of government that Bernie Sanders would have loved. I mean, he was a real socialist, and it actually worked for him. From what I understand, people had free education there.
Oh, it was a wonderful place. Gaddafi was turning Libya green. He built this amazing waterworks. He got rid of the private central bank, put in a state central bank, and a value-based currency, the gold dinar, and that was why he had to be killed.
Somebody should call Mr. Slick on that. I was surprised I didn't watch the whole debate. I just saw this in a snippet this morning. But Sanders shouldn't have just kept his mouth shut. He should have been all over on that, and said, you brought down a government, sovereign nation. There was absolutely no threat to the United States that actually was friendly to the United States.
Yeah, you're right. Sanders should have taken advantage of that. But Sanders, I think, has had his leash pulled, because, he's now out there talking about how this email server scandal should just go away. That's the issue that could put him in the White House right now. So for him to be pulling back from it, well, I'll tell you what that means a little bit later. But right now, Mark, I need to let you go. We got to take a 4-minute break for commercials. Back with more phone calls after these few words. America, welcome back to the show. So let's talk about Hillary's server, because that is not going away. Hillary wants it to go away, and some other people want it to go away as well. We'll get to that in a minute. But we are seeing more reports coming out, this one from Associated Press, where computer experts are basically saying that while Hillary had the server in her home basement, it was wide open. An amateur hacker, kid with in his parents' basement, could have broken into it. Hadn't disabled the remote desktop service, was wide open. And there's another point of vulnerability, because apparently Datto Incorporated was part of the network that stored classified messages from Hillary's email server. And it's wide open. No checkpoints. You could walk through the door. They were dumping paper into a dumpster that wasn't locked. You could just go rifling through that, and that's a very common hacker trick to get passwords and stuff. And remember, under an executive order signed by President Bill Clinton, computer companies that will be exposed to classified U.S. documents have to be cleared by a Defense Department agency as secure enough to trust classified email to. This company wasn't. And I still think there is a valid, legitimate question. If the combination of this wide open server on which were parked all these U.S. secrets, coupled with a charitable foundation legally allowed to accept money from foreign sources, means that Hillary was selling secrets for donations, a repeat of the Clintons' 1996 Chinagate scandal. All right, let's grab a phone call here. John in Barbados. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Tracking back to this Dutch report on MH17, it looks to be there is some specifics in there, but it's more a political document than it is a technical
Of course
document.
It's a political document. It's a piece of propaganda. I mean, there's no question. They violated every basic principle of an honest investigation, which is to get all the facts from all sources and then see where it leads. This investigation started out with a foregone defined conclusion, blame Russia for it, wouldn't accept data from the book missile manufacturers, wouldn't accept data from the accused party, Russia. Didn't even pick up all the debris at the crash site for like an entire year. And then they expect us to believe this nonsense that, oh yes, absolutely, it was a Russian missile coming from the Russian-controlled areas. That last part is even the most fantastic. They're using a computer simulation to show where the rocket came from. These rockets are maneuverable. And
well, I'm going to use a Riveroism.
Yes.
Look for what should be there and isn't, and that is a motive for the East Ukrainians to shoot an airliner down. And there's another one, another look for what should be there and isn't, and that is the vapor trail from the ground up to 33,000 feet to meet the airplane from a Buk missile. That vapor trail is not just vapor, it's smoke. If you watch missile launches, you know, they leave this huge trail behind them and it persists for about 20, 25 minutes.
No, depending on the wind. Okay, let's...
Depending on the wind, but the video of this airplane comes down. There is no vapor trail. There is no smoke trail from the ground upwards. Nothing. So my conclusion is it's impossible to have been a Buk missile.
Well, my opinion is, Putin's presidential jet was flying through that same airspace at about the same time. He was coming back from a 6-day tour of South American countries making deals. And like the American president, Russia's presidential jet is a converted commercial airliner. It's not as grand as Air Force One. And the sad, unfortunate reality is it's painted in the same colors as the Malaysian Airlines livery. And from a distance, it is very easy to mistake one for the other. And what I think is the likely explanation for what happened is Poroshenko wanted to shoot down Putin and kill him to throw the Russian government into turmoil in order to make it easier to recapture the eastern Ukrainian republics. They hit the wrong target. Everybody panicked and said, find a way to blame Russia for this.
Well, I'm looking at that, and again, the report, they couldn't even find the Kiev air traffic controller, which diverted this airplane and ordered it to descend in altitude. They didn't even speak to him. They couldn't find him. How can they come to any conclusion without talking to one of the major participants?
And they didn't talk to that Ukrainian pilot who was reported to have come down from the area at the same time and got out of his plane saying, we hit the wrong target, we hit the wrong target. They didn't talk to him either. And I don't blame Russia for going to the United Nations. I'm not expecting the UN to be any more fair and even-handed than the Dutch investigation. But no, I'm not buying this story, especially after the way the U.S. government lied about the accidental shoot-down of TWA 800. Remember when the USS Vincent shot down that Iranian Airbus, and for the first few days, the Airbus was secretly a weapon. It was trying to attack us. So anytime anything happens, their first instinct is to lie about it. And so, and again, there was no reason for the Russian government or for the Eastern Ukrainian republics to shoot down a passenger jet. It makes them look bad. What do they get by doing that? It doesn't make sense. It never did.
Another thing that raises my suspicions is that London have had the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder for all this time and nothing. Look at the Indonesian tragedy where an aeroplane went down. Within literally hours, they got these recorders, were assessing them, and about a week later, they produced the information. How long has it taken London? But they've kept quiet. They're hiding something.
Well, of course they are. And at this point, the fine details don't matter. As long as we all agree on what we all agree on, we're being lied to. Now we have to figure, what are we going to do about it? Which is, we stop listening to any more of their lies. Okay, we know they're BS artists. Let's ignore them.
Well, that was just one of my... Oh, by the way, in the Syrian situation, it looks like Russia is performing even better than most analysts have thought. They are really hammering in. I mean, ISIS is virtually finished.
Yeah, I can imagine those poor ISIS guys on the ground saying, wait a minute, you mean they really are shooting at us this time? All right. Well, listen, John, thank you very much for the information. We're going to let you go. I got a bunch of stuff to cover before the top of the hour here. Now, as you know, Hillary Clinton's campaign has been focused on a statement made by almost House Speaker McCarthy about how the hearing was damaging her poll numbers, and Hillary's campaign is out to say this shouldn't be about Hillary. This Benghazi committee shouldn't be about Hillary. And the mother of one of the victims, the people who died, is saying, yeah, of course it's about Hillary. She was Secretary of State. Everything that was happening at the consulate was on her watch. Of course it's all about Hillary. And it goes way, way beyond the email server. A lot of people are reprising this bit where Hillary Clinton was laughing about how Gaddafi was killed. We saw he died. Rolling Stone has an article out there saying there is no real Hillary Clinton. She is nothing but manufactured facade to get money, to get power, to get votes, to get what she wants. There's no real person in there. It is all artifice and fake. Now, as I mentioned before, Bernie Sanders actually came out and said Hillary's emails aren't real issues. Now, this is an issue that could put Sanders in the White House, or at least in the Democratic nomination. And if he's trying to shut it down, it supports the theory that there's a big scandal behind the email server, big enough to bring down the entire government, like the U.S. giving weapons to ISIS and Al-Qaeda, or Hillary selling secrets. We need to know which. Could have even been both. We'll be right back. America, welcome back to the show here. And as you know, Obama had an interview on 60 Minutes on Sunday. And during that interview, he acknowledged that Hillary having a private server was a mistake, but then he made the statement that Hillary's private email server did not compromise national security. Now, that is a statement Obama cannot actually make. He cannot actually know. It would have been more honest to say, to the best of my knowledge, there wasn't a violation of national security. But a lot of people are saying, and there's an article over here in Legal Insurrection saying that what was really going on is that Obama was sending an unofficial message to the FBI and the Department of Justice to lay off Hillary. And remember what I said before. In politics, there are two levels of secrets. There are the little tiny secrets that you use as weapons during campaigns. My esteemed opponent was caught wallpapering his kids or something. Then there are the great secrets. The secrets that are so horrible and so bad, they would bring down the entire government. The truth behind the Kennedy assassination, the truth behind 9/11. And I think that's what we've got here. I think behind Hillary's very weak email server, there are two really gigantic scandals. One is the fact that, yes, when the U.S. government was telling you all we're in a war on terror against ISIS and Al-Qaeda, the U.S. government was sending weapons to ISIS and Al-Qaeda. That's a biggie. And the other one was Hillary replaying the 1996 Chinagate scandal, selling secrets for donations. Those are legitimate questions. They deserve answers. You, the American people, deserve to know what your government is doing. Most transparent administration, my astrolabe. All right, let's grab some phone calls here. Steve in Alabama, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. I love your show. I just was watching videos about Bergdahl and Obama, you know, how they're kind of like birds of a feather, and they talk about not giving him any jail time and everything. But I discovered while I was watching some videos that this Jewish group that put Obama in office, and they mentioned that Valerie Jarrett was a Jew, but didn't she like actually live in the White House and was probably doing this whole Israel agenda through Obama? Just, I mean, they actually got control of the White House. I mean, I was just
there's no question. I've got a picture of Obama surrounded by his advisors. He's signing some piece of legislation, and Obama's the only non-Israel supporter in the entire room. Again, with this debacle with Netanyahu and AIPAC just openly on display, trying to force the Congress to kill the P5+1. Now the American people are waking up and realizing, it's not a wacko tinfoil hat conspiracy theory. Israel does have undue influence over the U.S. government and the corporate media and the economic system. It's not a myth. It's not a joke.
Well, I mean, they've actually got Jarrett living in the White House telling Obama everything to do, don't they? I mean, I had no idea she was Jewish. I mean, I just knew.
I don't even know that she's actually living in the White House. If you think about it, it's kind of a small building. But, there's no question that there is all that influence. Obama, though, in the middle of his second term as president, he's become a bit of a loose cannon. He doesn't owe anybody anymore. He's not running for office again. He can't run for office again despite his comment to the contrary on Sunday because of the 22nd Amendment. So he can kind of do what he thinks he wants to do, and he's not as easy to control as a first-term president that needs Israel support to get the second term. And so there's a lot of that going on as well.
This Bergdahl thing, I mean, I can't see, after being in the military, how they would let something like that caused the death of several of his mates, you know, looking for him. I mean, just off the hook. I mean, it's like,
we may not have the full story about that. Remember how they covered up the circumstances of Pat Tillman's story? Jessica Lynch, they made her this, huge heroic person, and everybody on the ground said, no, that's not what happened. The government lies. The government lies. The government lies. George Carlin used to say,
their inside man with the Taliban.
Could very well have been. Could have been a messenger. Could have been coordinating delivery of the weapons.
Exactly. I love your show, Mike. You're doing a great job. I watch you every day, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. I will as long as I can. And we're going to switch over to Ken in Michigan. Aloha, Ken. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello?
Yes, you're on the air.
It's Kevin.
Kevin, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Bad hamster.
I'd like to first off talk about the whole Democratic debate.
Yes. You know what the Democratic debate was? It was 5 people up on the stage saying, I will give you more than the others will. Free stuff. I will give you more free stuff than the others will.
And the sad thing about it was really all about Hillary. There was no real candidates. I mean, who were the other 3 people? Did you know them?
Not really. I mean, I know Bernie Sanders was there, and a lot of people think that he actually did win the debate.
And if Bernie Sanders is really serious about winning this campaign and turning this country around, he would have called her out, not only on her email scandals, but all the previous scandals beforehand. To me, it's the Democratic Party is completely catering to Hillary Clinton.
Oh, there's no question about that. I mean, she's had this attitude of entitlement and ascendancy ever since she launched her campaign. And, we're hearing from inside her campaign staff that, she's absolutely incensed that it's not going smoothly. Like it was all prearranged. You remember when Hillary and Obama had that meeting, got a lot of press. They met at this house over there on the East Coast, and they had a secret meeting. And, that's when it basically, they made a deal. I'll be Secretary of State and I'll be president after you, blah, 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 all backroom dealing. And now all of a sudden we have an American electorate that's very skeptical and distrustful of the establishment candidates. And next year is going to be the year of the Mavericks when it comes to the election. There's a huge anti-incumbency, anti-friend of Israel fever sweeping this country. And all of a sudden Hillary is realizing she's actually having to campaign to be the president, not just go through this display, this show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's, it's so weird too, Michael. You know, I've got some, you know, I'm a blue collar guy. You know, I graduated high school, went to technical school, blah, blah, blah. You know, but I've got many girlfriends that are highly educated. And it is really sad that we live in a world that, you know, these women who are highly educated, and you would think that, you know, they would realize all the scandals she's been involved with, all the lies she's been caught in, rubbing elbows with the Bilderbergers.
Well, what's going on here? I'm sorry to cut you off, but we're almost out of time here. What's going on here, Hillary is running her campaign as a personality cult. And if you study cult psychology, you know, it's not that Hillary's supporters, okay, don't know about the scandals. They don't care. It's like people who go to a church and they knew the pastor was diddling the altar boys. They don't care. They're just caught up in that worship. They're caught up in the sharing of the experience. I'm one of Hillary's people. And it's a very dangerous mindset. For
you know, and it's a learned behavior too. I truly believe that is a behavior that is actually taught to you, whether you realize it or not, or whether you pick up on it or not. But from the time you're in school, they're great education that they provide. Oh,
it was not just that. Sunday school, you're taught to worship and believe and not question. It's absolutely part of the control mechanism. And, you know, but again, these days, unfortunately, in our media-saturated world, most political campaigns, especially for the White House, they are run as personality cults. They're trying to inspire fanatical devotion in their followers because once they get that, it doesn't matter what scandals come out. You know, I mean, women are going to vote for Hillary because she's a woman, not as many as before. A lot of feminists are being turned off by her. And, but, you know, Hillary, it's going to be a fight here. And, I think Sanders could actually take the Democratic nomination away from her if he doesn't have an accident in a small aircraft.
He had a good opportunity to jab the forks into her and bring things out yesterday, and he didn't, and I'm very disappointed.
Yeah, I am as well, but
I almost feel like the Democrats are hand gifting this to her.
Well, you know, they may be. They may be. These things are negotiated ahead of time. The problem is the voters aren't going along with the program. And like I said, next year is going to be the year of the Mavericks. Thank you for the phone call. We got to let you go. We're going to take a break for news, commercials. When we come back, we'll be talking with Doug Eberhard from Buy Gold and Silver Safely. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And joining us on the phone right now is Doug Eberhard from one of our newest website advertisers, Buy Gold and Silver Safely. And it's very, very timely because gold hit a 3.5-month high last night, and we know there is growing concern over all this talk about banning cash, and we all need to find ways to keep our wealth under our control. And away from those crooked bankers and crooked politicians. So, Doug, thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you, Michael. Nice to be here.
All right, so tell us briefly about your business model, your company, what services you offer, and then I want to get into just the overall theory about why people should be investing in physical metals right now.
Sure. We have a precious metals company. We specialize in the physical delivery of the metals to our clients, and we do so at the lowest premium to spot in the United States. We basically scour the internet each day and look for our competitors' prices and then undercut them, and on average it's about a 1% commission for purchases of gold and silver coins and bars.
Now, I noticed over at the San Diego Better Business Bureau, you got a very positive rating from them, meaning that people can understand you're an ethical business, you're a fixed location storefront, you're not operating out of a van behind the drive-in movie theater or anything like that.
Right. We have an A+ rating, which is the highest rating you can get. We also have 0 complaints, which is an important issue in understanding what a gold company is all about. And we can get into a little bit later of how most gold companies work versus ours, if you'd like to.
Very, very much so. What are you seeing out there now in terms of demand? We're hearing that there's actually silver shortages out there, and a lot of dealers are actually charging very high premiums for delivery of physical as opposed to those paper contracts.
Yes, there's a shortage of certain metals, especially in silver. And that is centered around the silver eagles and the silver maples, where the premiums have shot up to $4 or $5 or even higher. And there's a shortage in the lower premium bars and rounds, where the premiums have gone up, but we're still actually able to get the rounds, for example, at 70 cents over spot, versus the eagles, which are $5 over spot. So we've kind of been pushing people towards the rounds, but there are delivery delays on some metals, and at the same time, we do have, though, plenty of, say, 1,000-ounce bars at very little over spot, and but most people don't go out and buy those kinds of products. So, in a sense, really what it is, it's a production issue with the suppliers out there. Mm-hmm. They got caught with this last downturn not having enough supply, and the machines that they have that produce the metals just haven't been able to keep up with the demand.
Well, I can certainly understand why there's a great deal of demand. Trust by people in the financial establishment has declined, along with trust in the corporate media, trust in the government as a whole. I mean, Obama is out there wailing about how American suspicions of the government are paralyzing us. Yeah, but, you kind of did it to yourself. A lot of people are looking at what's going on, where the Federal Reserve is now talking about negative interest rates on savings accounts. In other words, you have to pay them to keep your money in the bank. Most people are going to say, well, I'm just going to take my money out of the bank. And then they're coming back with this idea that, well, we're going to ban cash, so you have to leave your money in some bank someplace, and yes, we're going to help ourselves to pieces of it. We know that starting over in Cyprus, they had what they called a haircut. A lot of other people called it a scalping, where basically they're setting up the rules in Europe and here in the United States and in Canada. If the bank gets into trouble, they can help themselves to the money in your accounts. And how they did that here in the United States is they redefined savings account holders to be unsecured investors in the bank, where if the bank is losing money, you as the unsecured investors are expected to share in the losses. And it's just another example of economic fascism, where those who are making money get to keep it, and those who are losing money get to drop the losses on ordinary people. And I think most people who hold savings accounts are justified in thinking, look, I don't sit on the bank's executive staff. I'm not making these decisions. Why am I required to pay for the losses when things kind of get messed up? And that, I think, is driving a lot of people into ownership of metals. Now, we know that there's been a great deal of financial rigging, including the rigging of the physical metals prices in an attempt to discourage people from getting into silver and gold and platinum and palladium. But the wise thing to do is really look at that long term. Go back and look at, say, the stock market for the last 5 years versus the silver and gold prices for the last 5 years, and you'll see there's a very, very obvious trend there. And I don't encourage anybody to get into silver and gold with the idea that they're going to be trading it on a daily basis, but for long-term wealth preservation against a predatory economic system backed up by a complicit government, physical metals, that's just absolutely the way to go.
Yeah, I agree. Physical metals above everything else, because there's a profit side, but there's also, I think more importantly, an insurance side to owning metals. And it's really a fail-safe way that no matter what happens to currencies around the world, and this includes, of course, the dollar with all of the debt, the trillions of debt that backs it, that you have something that can be used as money. I'm not really a fear monger, though, when it comes to, talking to people about the markets. I'm actually, at present, I'll throw you for a loop a little bit. I'm dollar bullish, and it fits in with what you just said about what the Federal Reserve's doing with negative interest rates. They're actually trying to stimulate the economy the best way that they can. And you've seen them do quantitative easing where they've thrown money out into the public. It's mostly swallowed up by those banks and
I was going to say, they're not stimulating the economy, they're stimulating their own economy, and that's why, we're definitely in that fascist economic pattern.
Exactly.
But you were going to tell us, also, we're coming up on a commercial break here.
Sure.
You were going to tell us about what makes your particular operation different from the way that other silver and gold companies are operating.
Yes, in a nutshell, most gold dealers out there, especially the ones that you see advertising on TV that can afford the radio commercials as well, that they offer a certain type of product, and they're called numismatic rare or collectible type coins. And these are the coins that they make the 15 to 30% commissions on, and our company doesn't sell those. All we sell are bullion bars and coins, and we do it at a very low cost over spot. And so the number one question to ask a dealer is, if I buy this coin from you today and I sell it back to you at the same exact spot price, what are you going to pay me for it? And that's where I think the surprises come in if the dealer's honest in answering that question.
Well, obviously, numismatic value is something that can change with fashion trends, as it were. And I have seen a lot of very questionable advertising on TV where they're trying to pump, we got these dollars, that's the last shipment, and then when you actually look at the price for the coins they're selling, they are way over the spot price because they're trying to sell them as collectibles and numismatic value, but that can evaporate very, very quickly. If you're investing in physical metals, you want to invest for the metals itself. And again, rounds, bars, junk silver, if you want a uniform, recognizable tool for bartering, that's the way to go. Now, we're coming up on our 4-minute commercial break. We're going to come back one more segment with Doug Eberhard. And Doug, whatever you want to share with us about your business model and why people should be dealing with you and what your website is, and we'll be talking all about that when we come back from these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking with Doug Eberhard from Buy Gold and Silver Safely, and let's get the important stuff out of the way. Where would people turn their browsers to learn more about your company and its offerings?
Sure. The website we have is buygoldandsilversafely.com.
And, of course, there is a banner ad from WhatReallyHappened.com that you can click to basically go on over and take a look there. So you talk about you avoid the numismatic coins in favor of just the simple rounds and bars and the known investment coins like the Silver Eagle and the Silver Maple Leaf. And you're not into like the Ben Franklin $50 or anything like that.
No, the closest I would come to that would be the 90% silver bags. And the one thing interesting about the 90% silver, what they are, they're pre-1965 quarters and dimes. And if you go back to 1964, a gallon of gas would cost you approximately 25 cents, maybe a little bit more. And if you exchange that same exact quarter into the scrip of the day, the U.S. dollars, then today, according to GasBuddy.com, a gallon of gas is $2.92, and the silver melt value is $2.97 for gas and $2.92 for silver. So these coins keep their value, keep their purchasing power over time, and I think that's an important issue to know, whereas a 1965 quarter will get you 25 cents worth of gas.
Yeah, absolutely. The advantage of the 90% silver, or as it's sometimes called, the junk silver, a lot of people, and I know you don't want to be fear-mongering and everything, but a lot of our audience are very concerned that there is a big financial upset coming, and that they're going to have to use monetary units that are not issued by the Federal Reserve. And the advantage of the 90% silver, it's a recognized size and uniform shape that people will be able to recognize, whether, it's a quarter, silver, nickel, dime, whatever. And that is going to make it much easier to use in a barter-based economy as opposed to having to, shave off pieces of a large silver bar and weigh them out on a scale. And so for people who are more into the prepping, those bags of 90% silver are a good way to go. It's also a budget way to go. As you mentioned before, Doug, people aren't buying the 1,000-ounce bar. bars of silver. They're very, very pricey. But for people on a very tight budget, and most of us are, trying to get into some kind of metals wealth preservation, the 90% silver is also a very good way to go.
Right. It was I actually wrote a book in 2010 called Buy Gold and Silver Safely, and it is available on Amazon.com. And in that book, my number one recommendation was the 90% silver. The premiums have gone up on those a little bit, so for comparison reasons, we still also like the RMC rounds. Ironically, the company that sends the blank 1-ounce slabs over to the U.S. Mint for production of the Eagles is the same company we have an exclusive contract with to give that same silver to buyers at about $4.30 less an ounce. And so it really is about a $2,000 or so difference between buying 500 RMC rounds versus 500 Eagles. And we just kind of educate people as to what
you're not paying for the pretty stamping on the coin is basically what it comes down to. Okay.
Michael, yeah.
Okay, well, is there anything else you want to share with our listeners before we let you go?
Yeah, there's another book that I'm actually writing, which should be out in the next month, called Illusions of Wealth. And that book is really going to hit the 99% of investors that I missed in the first book. You know, most people don't go out and buy a book on buying gold and silver, but they'll go out and buy an investment book. And so I'm kind of just bringing awareness as to what stockbrokers do, financial advisors, insurance agents, or even gold dealers, and how they try to line their pockets. And I just kind of educate people as to what asset allocation really means and how to invest. And not kind of get ripped off, which seems to be the motivation of so many out there.
Yeah, it has become a major problem. I remember there was a magazine did a survey on Wall Street. I think this was about a year and a half ago. And they actually got 25% of the people they talked to on Wall Street, brokers, accounts, whatever, 25% openly admitted to engaging in fraud and said, we couldn't stay in business if we weren't doing this. And, of course, as you know, that
they stay in business, though.
Yeah. Well, you know, they're just getting all that quantitative easing money pouring out of the back of the Federal Reserve to keep them propped up. But again, the analogy you make about the quarter and the gallon of gas is absolutely true. Since 1965, the silver quarter and the gallon of gas have held their value at about the same. It's the ink and paper certificates that are losing their value, and the more they crank that printing press and the more zeros they type into the computers at the banks, the less and less that ink and paper is going to be worth. And again, if you're going to invest in physical metals, don't look at the daily price. You'll just get ulcers that way. This is long term. Over the long term, it will preserve your wealth against these various machinations of currency manipulation that we're seeing around the world.
That's for sure.
All right. Well, listen, Doug, thank you very much for spending time with us today. Just tripped over my own lips there. And we'll have you back after your new book is out to talk about that a little bit, okay?
Sure. People can sign up for that book announcement at illusionsofwealth.com as well.
Illusionsofwealth.com. All right, Doug, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here and get on back to the news here. We got about a half hour left to go in our program. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Now, getting on back to the Democratic debate, Martin O'Malley basically came out for the reinstatement of Glass-Steagall. And this is a consistent position. He's been talking about this for quite some time. And yes, we need Glass-Steagall back. There was a very good reason it was passed in the first place. When it was repealed, it led to the abuses of Wall Street that led to the disaster of 2008. The hard reality is the bankers cannot regulate themselves any more than a drug addict can be trusted to manage his own dose. It just doesn't work that way. Now, the anti-Trump campaign have gone after him because they're going after his wife and the fact that she's a model, and they're trying to basically say, oh, do we really want a model who's just first lady who's just a model and everything like that? Well, I don't know about you, but a first lady who looks hot in a bikini, I think that's a good thing. But she's actually a smart woman because she succeeded in the business of modeling. But for them to be going after Trump through his wife tells you just how scared of him they have become. We'll be back with a phone call after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, regarding last night's Democratic debate, Vice President Joe Biden said that he was going to be looking at it very, very closely, and the performance by the candidates would have a bearing on his eventual decision whether or not to step into the race. A lot of people would like him to. Because right now, if the Democrats are foolish enough to nominate Hillary Clinton as their candidate, they're going to lose the White House. She is trailing by huge numbers every single top-tier Republican candidate right now. Sanders is starting to look good. Sanders could take it away from her, but everybody is saying Biden should step in. We ran a poll at our website. Should Biden enter the race for the White House? And as of the last time I checked, let's see. Actually, the majority were saying no, and that's a bit of a surprise. I thought for sure that most people would be saying yes. I think he should step in. First and foremost, he's got the advantage of being the incumbent vice president. I think he could win. And more to the point, you know, I think Hillary would be an absolute I think any of these Friends of Israel candidates are going to be a disaster for this country. I still would like to see Trump eventually take it. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
Yeah, hi, Mike?
Yes.
Hi, yeah. On your beginning, before you had your guest, was talking about Laura Bush getting rid of insects in Texas. How come she don't get rid of the roaches in Washington?
All right.
And Mike, you know, Bernie Sanders I kind of like him a little. Not saying I'd vote at all because they're all crooks, but he kind of crushed me when it came up to the Russian thing. You know, like with the Crimea he mentioned I mean, it's like, oh no, you know, on the same boat now, you know?
Yeah, well, here's what's going on here. When you're a candidate and you're up there, regardless of what you know, what's been going on with the U.S. government, you're up there trying to guess what the American people know and believe, and that's what you pander to. And so he obviously thinks that most Americans have bought the propaganda that Russia stole Crimea. He's mistaken. And, you know, but that's what they do. And of course, Hillary's a master at it. That's why she has done a complete reversal on 4 of her main policy points between 2008 and today. She's out there saying what her pollsters are saying the American people want to hear. And that's the entire mechanism. She doesn't believe in any of it. She's not going to live by any of it. Look at all the good things that Obama said back in 2008 and all the promises he's made, and he hasn't kept a single one of them.
And another thing he never mentions about is the Federal Reserve, like Ron Paul does. He mentions like Wall Street, which, you know, I agree with, Wall Street being like a bunch of crooks, but Federal Reserve is like, you know, the tier 1 crook. You know, and like, he never really mentions that like Ron Paul.
No, he doesn't. And, it's a shame we don't have another Ron Paul in the race this year. But we don't. And again, the attraction for me to Donald Trump is not that I agree with everything he says, or that he's going to have a really hot-looking first lady. It's the fact that because he does have his own money, he's not susceptible to being bought and manipulated the way so many other of our presidents who enter the White House poor and leave the White House insanely rich, you know, seem to be. And again, I think we're going to see a huge anti-incumbency fever sweep this country next year.
I wanted to change subjects, about the Russian cruise missiles, which they all did reach their targets, by the way. But the next day they did it wasn't reported really too much, about the submarine testing 12 of them out, and they all hit their targets. So, you know, all that was just about, like you said, buy more cruise missiles from us instead of buying it from them. And I don't even think, are they making the Tomahawk anymore?
I don't honestly know. I know that a few years ago there was supposed to be a reactivation of the line to replace all the ones that the U.S. had used up in all these other countries. They're probably onto a new design now. But again, I think the reason they pulled the Theodore Roosevelt out of the Persian Gulf when the Russian Navy started to show up is they didn't want a larger scale repeat of the USS Donald Cook embarrassment.
And then I want to change subjects one more time real quick about Walmart, how their earnings are down. People need to realize Walmart is subsidized by the federal government, and they get their whole reason for having low prices is because of the EBT card. That's what their whole economic system is built upon.
Yes.
And people need to realize that. And their farms that they own, are subsidized. So.
Yeah, it really is a racket. And like any other large corporation, they have bought themselves the support and cooperation of the U.S. government at the expense of the taxpayer and the consumer. And they are insanely wealthy. They're not suffering or hurting. And it is amazing. The richer the rich get, the more they're screaming about how the minimum wage is what's wrong with this country. And that isn't. The wealth inequality is what's wrong with this country, because for a healthy economy, you've got to have currency flowing at all levels of our society into all necessary areas of economic development. When you pile it all up over Wall Street and Washington, D.C., the rest of the economy starts to lock up. We're not going down to Walmart to buy things because we don't have anything to buy things with. And the banks want to loan us more money to go out and buy stuff with, but most Americans are on credit card diets. We are. We've paid down most of our credit cards. We don't use them. If we can't pay cash for something, we're going to do without. And I think most Americans are kind of going along with that. But when you have an entire economic system built on debt, that's a problem. Because the only way that can keep the pyramid scheme going is to always find more and more borrowers to go deeper and deeper into debt to allow the creation of new money to keep the whole thing propped up. When they talk about the growth of the economy, it's a misleading word because you'll think that growth is good. What they're actually talking about is the increase in the total aggregate debt of America. That's what they mean when they say the economy is growing, means it's sinking deeper into debt.
Yeah, the Ponzi scheme is collapsing. Nothing they can do about it either.
No, they're just going to run those printing presses and until they run out of ink. All right, Dustin, I need to let you go. We're coming up here on the end of our show, and I need to really cover a lot of ground before the top. So I think we're going to go ahead and close the phone lines for today. And I'm going to get to as many of these stories as I can so I don't take them into tomorrow. Let's see. Now, the Department of Justice has created a new position in the Department of Justice that will target on and focus on people with anti-government views. It's a new Department of Justice position. This was announced by John Carlin. Now, I hate to be the one to remind Carlin about this, but anti-government views are protected speech under the First Amendment. The First Amendment exists to give us the right to stand up and say, hey, the government is wrong. The government makes mistakes. The government is catering too much to the rich and powerful and not enough to we the people. That's all protected speech. And now the Department of Justice, which wouldn't prosecute Lois Lerner, probably not going to prosecute Hillary Clinton, but by golly, if you say bad things about the government, we're coming after you. Now, interestingly enough, a senior diplomat with the European Union government allegedly told former NSA intelligence analyst, we got to take a break for commercials. This is an interesting story. We'll come right back to it. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, over at the Daily Beast, they have a columnist, John Schindler, who's also a former NSA intelligence analyst and counterintelligence officer, and apparently a senior diplomat with an unnamed European Union government basically told him, according to a tweet he put out Monday, that his government thinks Obama may be mentally unwell and is not fit to serve. Should be removed from office, impeachment, 25th Amendment, something like that. So if the European Union governments are starting to have serious doubts about our president, it's going to accelerate this trend of the European Union pulling away from the U.S. war agenda. And they already are. They're out there. They're making deals with Russia. They're making deals with Iran. This whole agenda, the dollarification of the Middle East, the demonization of Russia and China for daring to have the ruble and the yuan challenge the supremacy of the U.S. dollar, it's all falling apart. All right, let's talk about immigration now. Apparently, the migrants are not really presenting a positive public image of themselves, which is working to the detriment of the No Borders agenda. And apparently, there are videos of them holding sticks and pipes and shouting Allah Akbar up in Germany. Hostilities are building on both sides. These migrants have been lured into this migration. Somebody has promised them all kinds of free stuff. And I don't think it's a coincidence that most of these migrants are going into the nations with the most developed welfare systems. They're literally migrating to get the free stuff. Same here in the United States. And I guess Europe has had enough of this because the United Nations Security Council has now authorized all naval forces of the European Union nations to use military force to turn back boats bringing refugees across the Mediterranean. So it's gone on far enough. Okay. Let's see. Google degenerates into the Ministry of Truth. This is alarming a lot of people, and it's probably a good reason to stop using Google anyway. Maybe go over and use Yandex or something else here. Now, Google has been modifying their search engine. Originally, they modified it with a knowledge base to try and make everything that serves up to you more relevant. Now they're taking it a step further, where they're developing a database of what they consider to be, well, they're calling it truthful. And basically what Google is getting ready to do is to not produce search results that may challenge the orthodox official version of whatever it is you're searching about. They're that open about it. They've named the system. This is going to be great. We will make sure that Google delivers to you the truth, at least as seen by the owners of Google and the U.S. government and various so-called friendly governments around the world. So Google is no longer a search engine. It's a will deliver you the approved propaganda engine, and probably a good reason to start using some of the search engine now. Speaking of propaganda, interesting little story came out of consortiumnews.com about Rupert Murdoch's history, about how he intentionally ingratiated himself with President Reagan, offering to collaborate with U.S. propaganda operations with his global media empire. Journalistic integrity apparently is not part of his makeup. Now, as you know, we're getting closer and closer to the anniversary of the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and there's a lot of material already beginning to appear. There is a new book out, written by journalist David Talbot, who says that his research indicates that CIA Director Allen Dulles gave the actual order to assassinate President JFK. Now remember, John F. Kennedy fired Allen Dulles following the Bay of Pigs fiasco, saying that Dulles had lied to him about what was going on. First and foremost, Dulles had told JFK, the instant we invade at the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban people are going to run on down to the beach and join us against that evil Fidel Castro. So Kennedy authorized the invasion. They invaded. The Cuban people rushed on down to the beach and pounded the Cuban brigades into the sand, sending an unequivocal message to the rest of the world that however bad life might be under Fidel Castro, it was certainly preferable than anything that they had been under U.S. puppet Batista. Huge diplomatic embarrassment. Kennedy fired Allen Dulles. According to this journalist's book, Dulles was the one who gave the final go, no-go to assassinate John F. K. And then, of course, a lot of people were scratching their heads considering that JFK had fired Allen Dulles. How is it that he wound up sitting on the Warren Commission? Because at that point, he didn't have a job, did he? He wasn't with the CIA anymore. Another one of those very strange appointments to the Warren Commission, like the banker. His name's eluding me. Tells you how old I'm getting. President of the Chase Manhattan Bank, former president of the World Bank. McCloy, John J. McCloy. Now then, we are seeing once again a revival of all this nonsense about the Confederate flag and the Confederacy, and you know it's shameful, and we've got to take down all these monuments to all these Confederate generals, and we've got to burn all the Confederate flags here. And they literally reached the point of desecrating the graves of Confederate officers. Okay? There is something you need to keep in mind. All of the Confederate soldiers, sailors, and Marines that fought in the Civil War were made official United States veterans by an act of Congress in 1957. U.S. Public Law 85-425, Section 410. Approved 23rd May 1958. That means everybody who served in the Confederacy is declared by Congress U.S. veterans equal to any other. So when you're out there tearing down a Confederate statue or monument or headstone, you are in fact desecrating the grave of a United States military veteran. Just something you might want to keep in mind. Okay, Susan Rice is out there saying that if you want to know why things are bad in Syria, it's got nothing to do with our trying to remove the government for 4 years. It's human-caused global warming. I am not kidding you. She actually came out. This was reported in Breitbart. National Security Advisor Susan Rice is saying climate change is responsible for the conflict in Syria and represents a looming threat to the entire world. This is your government on drugs. Any questions? I got a huge list of everything that's been blamed on global warming. I have to add this to it, obviously. The conflict in Syria is due to global warming. Our trying to overthrow the government for 4 years, giving weapons to terrorists, got nothing to do with it. It's all the fault of those of you who will not recycle your plastic bags. Now, over in France, Philippe Verdier is like the star weatherman for France. Every night he's out there on French network TV predicting the weather. He has now come out with a book saying that this human-caused global warming stuff is nonsense and that paid climatologists and political leaders are trying to take the world hostage with misleading data. And the carbon Nazis are out there saying, you can't say that. You can't say that. You're a climate denialist. You have to be prosecuted under the RICO Acts. You have to be thrown in jail. You can't question the most holy revealed dogma of St. Al of the Gore. Forecasters are predicting the coldest winter for Ireland this coming winter since records were kept starting 50 years ago. And a lot of people are all around Europe, not just Ireland, but Britain, are noticing the Siberian swans have gotten here almost a month earlier than normal. And the carbon Nazis are out there trying to say this is nonsense, it doesn't mean anything, but the Old Farmer's Almanac uses nature to get their forecasts here. I'm sure Al Gore's out there saying, those swans are all working for the oil companies. We need to prosecute the foul for global warming denial. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow, Thursday, here on the Genesis Communication Network. My thanks to everybody who is out there calling their local talk radio stations, pointing them at GCNlive.com. It is working. We're picking up affiliates. We're getting the word out. This is a call to Rivero's Rangers to keep up the pressure. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.